Hello everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Silk Road Revival. Today with us Professor Cesar Castillo-Garcia from Wesleyan University. So, hello, Professor. Happy to see you in Silk Road Revival.
Yes. Thank you so much for the invitation, Ulysses.
Mhm.
This is like a really nice space to talk. So I am really happy to be with you here.
Thank you too for being our guest today. So, before we before I ask my question, I want briefly introduce you to our audience. So, Professor Cesar Castillo Garcia is a visiting professor in the College of School Studies and the Department of Economics at Wesleyan University. His current research focuses on the study of income and uh, wealth inequality and political conflict. His history of neoliberalism and capitalism, applications to inequality research, the political economy of precarious work, and social and political philosophy. So, Professor, my first question is what initially drew you to the political economy and history of economic thought?
So yes, thank you for the question. So uh, as you mentioned, I am a Peruvian scholar. So my decision, my choice to uh, go through the study of political economy and the history of economic thought had to be initially primarily with the experience of the different historical and economic processes in Peru and in Latin America in general. Most of the time, some of the main economic changes done in the region and in the country like Peru, again, don't have to be, or those didn't have to be necessarily with the specific structural changes, meaning like changes in technology, changes in global trade, or changes in the material conditions, but they related to the enactment or the implementation of economic policy. But this economic policy has, or I understood through the process of my education, I mean, that there in Peru, but also abroad, that this implementation has to be a lot with the politics behind
Mhm,
the debates on economic ideas,
mhm,
and also the most important, the specific type of ideological patterns. I mean that I make this distinction because sometimes the politics are more contextual, respond to a specific like events
mhm,
happening in a certain point in time. Like for instance, how to, in the case of an economy like Peru, or even like in a case like an economy like the United States, which both of them are integrated, but to the global system, but in different levels. The question is so the questions could be related for both economies to, okay, how do we, what type of response do we enact for the specific changes in the global economy,
mhm,
so you
mhm,
have these contextual elements, but then you have also some people who would say that there is this recipe A or this recipe B to enact that such a response, and
mhm,
that has to be with these more ideological trends,
mhm,
so those are, or these is to realize, to figure out the importance of these specific elements was the thing that took me towards the path of doing research on political economy and history of economic thought, which also took me sort of away from the traditional background of an economist.
mhm,
The background of a traditional economist has to be with have a really high technical education on econometrics, mathematical modeling, applied, what it's called nowadays applied economics. This is
uh-huh,
something that I for real was trained to do, but at the same time, in that, if I was just stuck in such a type of training, I was I was like losing this other whole world that I just referred to.
mhm,
So that's the reason why I ended up doing also this sort of like a more historical political economy research.
Got it. And my next question, what's your favorite course to teach, and how do you make economics engaging for students who may initially find it abstract or intimidating?
So that's a really interesting question. So I really enjoy to teach. There are two courses that I really enjoy to teach.
Hmm.
Here, I really enjoy to teach the economic history for Latin America because it's a different context for most of the undergrad students that I am teaching to. But another interesting course that I really enjoy is the one that I just had an opportunity to teach it once. This sort of course on income and wealth inequalities, an
Hmm.
introduction to income and wealth inequality analysis, which, because of the name of it, the title of the course is an introduction to specific concepts in the study of income and wealth, but also the introduction to specific methodologies, like the basic stuff, for instance, how to calculate indicators of income and wealth concentration. One of the most traditional ones is the Gini coefficient, right?
Hmm.
So in this course, we go through the study of what could be the main basic concepts that we need to understand to build such an indicator, but also the history of this, of how these tools were built. So I really enjoy it because it's a mixing of quantitative, technical knowledge, but also historical patterns, and we
Uh-huh.
see a lot of data. So that's it's a really interesting thing. And the economic history of Latin America, as I mentioned, puts the students into a different context because it's like to know not only about the region, which has a different type of economy, but also to know more about the different theories going that were developed in the Latin American context, especially the structuralist, Latin American structuralist tradition. Mhm.
Got it. And so those are the kind of questions like I kind of get myself like that the questions like kind of might not be related to your field. So could you say? I mean, you may not answer them like if they are not related to. So yeah. So so one of those questions are like who should decide what things cost? The amount of work put into them or how much people want them right now?
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't get it. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Sure. I said like who should decide what things cost, the amount of work put into them, or how much people want them right now.
Okay, I see. Yeah, that's a tricky question. I mean, that first of all, in the type of, depending on what type of economic system are we located to,
Mm-hmm.
and some of these price, cost, and production, productive factors allocation, the decisions on this type of or to the question of who should decide how to allocate the resources or how to decide uh, how these variables should move, it's not an easy question to answer because, again, like in an integrated market system, it's theoretically it's supposed that nobody decides
Uh-huh.
into that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's the outcomes in this case are emerging from the whole process of the market.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that in within these capitalist or market economic systems, we have different levels of concentration, and we have also the emergence of different levels of market power,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that there are some actors which build for their own more capacity of deciding, and they then can decide how much they could pay to their workers or how much they would extract in terms of value from the workers that they hire. And by that, by this I'm referring to corporations, or it could be like big corporative actors, which then are in some cases, depending on how is the owning structure of these enterprises, meaning like maybe they are like open market firms,
Mhm.
like they have shares in the financial and stock exchange market, or if they are like family corporations, like in the case of Latin America, you know,
Mhm.
depending on the structure, they would have different types of leverage, and the effects of their decisions could have different levels or different degrees of result.
Mhm.
In any case, this market power accumulation for these actors sort of make it more difficult to think about the idea that the outcomes on prices, wages, or work allocation are just only determined in the market, you
Uh-huh.
know? So, yes, these big actors sometimes, these actors who have market power, sometimes they have more influence than the other ones in the
Mhm.
specific outcomes. But again, if we are talking about global integrated markets, probably like that influence that they do have could have a specific constraint, you know,
Mhm.
and they have to be with these unintended consequences of the decisions of other actors,
Mhm.
you know, and other technological, environmental, or political conditions happening. I mean, that all over
Mhm.
the world, you know.
All right.
So yes, that would be my answer. Like traditional economists or traditional theories would say that this is determined or emerged in the market,
Mhm.
whereas from a political economy perspective, we would say that yes, in certain cases, but then if you would dig more into what are the specific institutions, what is the specific place of a specific actors, how about their economic power, probably the
Mhm.
situation could be like a different, you know.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
All right, I got it.
So
And my next question, uh, what is so special about diamonds and gold that they cost so much and everyone wants to own them?
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for real, I mean that initially I would tell you like I wouldn't know why, or you can create like a specific theory to explain that.
Mhm.
That has to be with this theory of scarcity, for instance. Like you have this uh, coming back to the history of economic thought and looking at the specific works of John Locke on value, you know, like
Uh-huh.
you have this paradox of water and diamonds.
Ah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
so water is so abundant that
Uh-huh.
nobody would like put a price on it, and it's not so scarce. So probably it has the specific feature of a public good, you know. Whereas
Uh-huh.
diamonds, it's mostly about like are difficult to get. They require more work or more labor to get because you need to go to mine them and then to do mining and then extract them. So that the scarcity or the difficulty, the scarcity has to be with the difficulty to obtain them.
Uh-huh.
So probably people would look at that the same for gold, you know, the
Uh-huh.
difficulties that can be found into obtain when figuring out how to obtain specific amounts of gold or diamond that have to be with that we don't have an infinite amount of
That,
mines, you know.
mm,
So then ergo what you have is that you have a source of scarcity because of the lack of sources, big
mhm,
sources, and at the same time you have also this scarcity of labor power or labor or workers just allocated into extracting these
mhm,
minerals, you know.
uh-huh,
So that suppose that could give these two type of goods, gold and diamonds, its high value because of their scarcity. But then you
mhm,
would figure out in the current context of climate change, for instance,
mhm,
water, because of the different weather situations and the different hydrological situations going on all over the world. I mean, that
mhm.
water could like become like you know like also a scarce resource,
Scarce.
and not because of the lack of labor to extract it necessarily, but because of more. because of other different conditions which are not under our control, you know.
Mhm.
So that's the thing, you know.
Uh-huh.
So in any case, has to be with this idea or with this basic conception of scarcity. Although I would say that there are other institutional conditions that have to be, for instance, with the idea that how people in a specific Western tradition or how the societies of the Western tradition just went through the choosing of gold as a means of exchange because of
Mhm.
its durability, you know.
Uh-huh.
Like I mean, they could have used silver, but the problem was that it was difficult back in the days to mine silver without obtaining like a sort of like pure levels of it, whereas gold became like highly appreciated because also of its high value, so it turned into a store of value, you know. So
Mhm.
it's more a conventional thing as well, you know. For
Mhm.
diamonds, I cannot tell the same, but at least for gold, I mean that we see like the issuing of gold and the use of gold as part of the monetary system
Mhm.
back in the days, in the time of gold standard and before, was also an issue of convention, you know.
Mhm. Got it. And my next question, it's I mean related to economic state of the Nazi Germany, like back in the history. Uh, so how did Nazi Germany manage to pull off its economic miracle in the 1930s after the post-World War One collapse? And was that growth actually real or just an illusion built for war?
I see. Well, I mean, I am not, unfortunately, I am not a specialist into the
No.
economics of Nazi Germany. I can talk a lot more about the economics of the Great Depression. I mean that, but what it's really interesting for me, it's what relates a little bit more to my research on neoliberalism in Latin America,
Mhm.
because the post-war was for a Germany a space of for the debates of what type of new capitalist economy the German government or the federal German Republic was trying to build after
Mhm.
the war, you know. So
Uh-huh.
it's a time of the in which they are deciding the post-war, I mean, like not only to implement the social welfare system, but at the same time, a lot of measures of market system, a market order or free
Uh-huh.
market economy, you know.
Uh-huh.
And that's a time in which many, or the post-war also was a time in which many of these intellectuals known as the ordo liberals
Mhm.
or the German economic thinkers who thought that the better economic order to implement into the
Mhm.
Western economies was the market order, the competitive market order,
Mhm.
started to find their path to as pundits, important intellectuals, but also like advisors of some technocrats like the vice chancellor and also
Mhm.
Ministry of Economics of Germany during Konrad Adenauer, Ludwig Erhard.
Uh-huh.
So that I am more, that I can talk more. And yes, they create this whole idea of the or they started to popularize this idea of the German economic miracle, right? Because
Uh-huh.
after the war, they sort of like Erhard's uh, uh, um, um, actions were like pushing forward this or were happening at the time of this economic recovery in Germany, you know.
Mhm.
So uh, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's for sure that the recovery happened because of the free market policies and also the austerity, some of the austerity policies they implemented during this time, meaning that they try to maintain like an equilibrium or balance fiscal budget, government budget, or that they wanted to implement, they don't want it initially to implement the social welfare, then the social welfare system or the, you know, the pension
Mhm.
system for which like, and the worker security system for which like Germany is now really well known. was implemented against their own decisions, pushed forward
Mhm.
by the sort of a Catholic coalition. But
Mhm.
still, like what I try to say is like most of these intellectuals were trying to push forward this idea that austerity and institutions in favor of the competitive markets or
Mhm.
the capitalist competition are the ones which should matter for the economic growth of Germany.
Mhm.
But the interesting thing is that during the 60s, they were also taking this idea into
Mhm.
other regions. And that relates to my work about Latin America, because for the early discussions or the post-war discussions on neoliberalism happening in Latin America, these Germans were really active in to promote this idea that austerity and competition and market competition and free market institutions should push forward or should trigger should be implemented, sorry, to trigger or push forward economic development,
Mhm.
meaning, of course, like economic, or meaning by that that economic development is equal to economic growth, you know.
Mhm.
So, but they were taking always sides. So we implement putting it as an putting Germany. They were putting Germany as an example. Like, so we had the economic miracle because of these
Uh,
policies that we implemented, which was not really true at all, you
mhm.
know. And then
Mhm.
selling this whole like package, as you would say, so
Mhm.
ideological package to the Latin Americans during the 60s, you know.
Mhm.
And they were an active also group of Swiss and German intellectuals, especially in South America, also like or people related to these specific national groups or immigrant groups, Germans and Swiss immigrant groups who also try to
Mhm.
popularize this idea. You know.
Uh,
Yes,
got it.
that's. I don't know if I'm not. I know that I am not replying directly to the question, but that's what I would know a little bit more.
Uh-huh. Alright, got it, got it.
About.
And so, like, I had one more question, like, related to this topic. So why did, like, for after the World War Two, like, why did Germany and Japan, rebuild so quickly after World War Two, while post-Soviet countries struggled so much in 1990? Like, for example, Uzbekistan, it's post-Soviet country and it kind of struggled compared to Germany and Japan. So why,
Yes.
like?
Yeah. No. Thank you. Yeah. This is something that I can try to talk more about it. Although again, like it's not my I'm not specialized a lot to that about this, but to talk about this. But from my readings, is I think that it has to be a lot, not only with already the previous industrial basis of these countries, like meaning Japan and Germany, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, you can say that also like post-Soviet countries also had certain industrial bases, but
Mm-hmm.
then you have the real structural conditions, meaning the conditions to build or like conditions to increase or try to rebuild your industrial complex, you
Mm-hmm.
know. They could be the same in this in both of, or they could be similar in both type of experiences. But the second part is that how you're going to finance this process of
Uh-huh.
reconstruction of the industrial complex.
Uh-huh.
So in the case of, and that's which makes the difference. I mean, in the case of Germany and Japan after the World War II, what you have is that an active presence of the United States with the Marshall Plan,
Mm-hmm.
or like the interests of the United States into a sort of like a capture, not the institutions, but at least like to try to sell this image on about that. So we are sending the money, we're sending the financial aid, and that way we are just like bonding with the administrations of
Mm-hmm.
these post-war countries, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the post-Soviet experience just happened at the same time, unfortunately, with the change of, first of all, the lack of support or the heavy support, direct support from the U.S. government administration,
Mhm.
and at the same time the active presence of the World Bank or the IMF,
Mhm. Mhm.
so, and especially the 90s, or which is like the time of the Soviet collapse,
Mhm.
is the time for the implementation of these so-called Washington consensus ideas. I mean, that's mostly about like austerity, so you wouldn't find a really active role of these two international institutions, again, like World Bank and IMF, into
Mhm.
trying to finance the reconstruction of industrial complex. Most
Mhm.
of the time they would be like mostly interested into lift the whole previous like a Soviet apparatus, or the any residuals of these type of institutions, and at the same time trying to send is issue loans, but to do other type of investments which don't have to be with the reconstruction of
Mhm.
industrial complex.
Uh-huh.
Nowadays, this is debated as, or this is again discussed in relation to the new interest of a World Bank into so-called industrial policy,
Mhm.
But by the 90s, they really opposed industrial policy because they identified with what was implemented in countries from regions like Latin America or some Asian countries, which was this sort of like import substitution industrialization,
Mhm.
So they didn't want in the 90s to implement that. Actually, the whole debate in this type of institutions was just to issue money
Mhm.
or support specific initiatives to just open trade
Mhm.
without thinking on what is the type of technological or industrial developments that would support again the reconstruction of the economies of countries like the post-Soviet ones, but also the post-crisis Latin American
Uh-huh.
ones. I mean, the 1980s is the debt crisis period, so it was the crisis of the collapse also of the import substitution industrialization in Latin America. And but the World Bank and the IMF wouldn't be really interested into support its rebirth. Actually,
Mhm.
the collapse of the ISI was really good for them.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Got it. And my next question, so when a factory buys a new machine that replaces workers, does it help society or hurt the working person?
I see. Yeah, now that's a good question. There is a concept in classical political economy, or what for some people is known as Marxian political economy, which is called labor saving technologies. You
Mhm.
know, there is different ways of understanding technological change, because you can have a specific type of technologies which creates more jobs. Like for instance, I mean that you have in the typical model or the classical model of a factory, of a shop floor. If you buy new machines, you can hire more people,
Uh-huh.
because, or think about the I don't know if maybe some of the people who will see this podcast heard about this example in the Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's like pin factory, right?
Mhm.
So machinery is not that machinery is making jobs to disappear, but it's making the whole labor process to change. And
Mhm.
this through this labor process, new type of occupations are created, and the only issue that happen is that workers are reallocated into different functions, right?
Mhm.
So this
Uh-huh.
is a type of technological change. There is other type of technological change that helps to build that. If you find new types of technologies, maybe you can also hire more of these people doing these different functions. Like, for
Mhm.
instance, again, coming back to the pin factory, like someone who's gonna put the pieces of metal to be more tense, then someone who's going to cut these pieces of metal, someone who's going to put the plastic head in the piece of metal, so then you have a pin, so you have more of these people.
Uh-huh.
But then economists, like, or classical political economists like Marx, would figure out that there is some other types of technology which actually replace people,
Mhm.
like and that's what is called like labor saving technologies. And in some cases they wouldn't only replace the amount of workers that you would require, but also increase the amount of production that
Mhm.
these workers could do
Mhm.
without necessarily changing their wages. So
Mhm.
that's a so-called like like extraction of value, or the increase of exploitation. If
Uh-huh.
that happens in the whole economy and it's generalized, if that change happen in a general time, so we have a rise in the labor exploitation. That's a
Uh-huh.
Marxist concept. Now, I want just to add as a final element this. So nowadays, what we have with AI, for instance, like
Mhm.
I am, I mean that I am not doing active research into this. I really enjoy to research on precarious labor and informality. But what you see with cases of precarious labor here in the United States, also in Europe, and also in Latin America, is that most of this like AI technology for real is even like it's not creating new jobs. It's
Uh-huh.
just
Yeah.
basically reducing the amount of jobs, because you want the similar tasks that were required
Uh-huh.
for a firm to hire like 20 informatic engineers. Now it's just like like making it easier for them to just hire one
Mhm.
to supervise that the algorithm is doing the whole set of tasks that the 10 or 20 previous ones were doing.
Mhm.
So we have like of course we have an extension of tasks
Uh-huh.
similar to the example of Adam Smith case, but then we wouldn't see those tasks being performed by workers.
Uh-huh.
So that's a typical case of a labor saving technological change.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So those who are kind of losing their job need to try harder to find a job that matches their field, right?
Yeah, and that would be like really difficult, because then you would say that if these type of AI technologies are like affecting or are like a try are creating more or are reallocating the investment, the money of the investors or the capitalists towards like a more service sector,
Mhm.
a more service sector economy. So you would figure out that there will be not enough jobs, or
Uh-huh.
there will be play, or on the other hand, there will be more jobs, but these more jobs would be worse paid.
Uh-huh.
I mean that
Yeah.
lower
Yeah.
wages. I mean that there is I forgot the name of this professor, but she wrote this recent book published by Princeton University Press, which is titled beneath the wage. And what you have also in industries like the service sector, which is
Mhm.
basically the one which is supported by the apps, like here in the United States, related. So one of the most important examples of that is these delivery food apps, or
Uh-huh.
Uber or whatever. I mean, you'll see that most of these workers are really low paid, but at the same time, the something that happens is that this type of jobs or occupations go through a process of informalization, meaning
Mhm.
that there is always new legislation
Uh-huh.
being
Yeah.
enacted that doesn't that make the job of these workers to see less similar to the typical jobs.
Mhm.
So typical jobs are like affected by minimum wage.
Mhm.
You have hours, you have your rights on, you can unionize yourself. Whereas this service sector, algorithm, or AI type of occupations, probably your wage doesn't depend on the minimum one, but depends on.
Mhm.
on the outcome that you get from the service that you provide. So
Yes.
then, I mean that then I mean that that would require you to probably work more hours than a typical work, and then in few cases you would be able to have access to social welfare,
Mhm.
and then so that's really similar to an informal economy job in countries like the Latin American ones. I mean, that are like
Uh-huh.
the Peruvian economy, you know. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting how a high technology capitalism is creating these sort of new ways of exploitation, you know.
Uh-huh. Thank you, Professor. Uh, this was it of the part one, and for the part two, I prepared some questions to your research paper that is called "The Crooked Timber That Bore Fruit: Peruvian Fascist Intellectuals of the 1930s and Echoes of Their Influence Nowadays." So, my
Mhm.
first question: why did Peruvian fascism remain an intellectual movement rather than becoming a massive government regime like in Italy or Germany?
Yes. No, thank you. Well, the issue is that Peru, that's a good question actually. And the issue is that Peru didn't have the same type of uh, industrial structure
Uh-huh.
Italy and Germany. I mean that by the time that the Nazism or fascism were
Uh-huh.
emerging in both Germany and Italy respectively, they had like an important industrial complex, you know,
Uh-huh.
so that what does it mean? Like you have worker movements, you have a lot of unions, and the debates in the respective parliaments or republics happen around these distributive concerns, you know,
Mhm.
like again in which like the main subjects or agents of debate or actors into these debates beyond the politicians and the elites are the workers as well, like
Mhm.
or typical industrial workers. Whereas in Latin America or in Peru, specifically 1930s, of course, 1930s, 1940s is a time in which the economy has an important or a developing initially in the beginnings a industrial or manufacturing sector, but it's mostly like an agricultural economy, you know,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
or an export-oriented economy. So most of the workers are related just to a specific portion of the
Mhm.
agricultural or mining sectors, as
Mhm.
and they are unionized, some of them, or at least they integrate like certain social movements, but they are not they are not a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other hand, you have this other part of the labor, quote unquote, labor sector, labor market, which is integrated for by workers in the so-called haciendas, or again also mining complexes,
Mhm.
which are not under labor free labor market regime. They are more
Mhm.
into they are performing the tasks in a more like a sort of like a feudal latifundia
Mhm.
servitude style of economy, you know.
Mhm.
So I think that that reduces the opportunities for a fascist movement to have more support. Also,
Mhm.
you have on the other hand like a really a small middle class.
Mhm.
So it seems like a Peru, especially in the 20th century or since the 20th century, was always like this type of polarized economy in which you have a lot of a small group of people who have a lot of money, but
Mhm.
then a lot of people who are really poor
Uh,
or low income, and they still can survive, but they are really not making the same as the rich.
mhm.
So elites have the power, the economic and the political and even the cultural power, but the social movement during this time is not too strong.
Mhm.
I think that's the case, and there was even like a more difficulties to talk about like a sort of like a national identity or ethnic
Mhm.
national identity. You know, I mean that in Italy you have during the fascist experience this whole construction of the Latin identity. You know, the Italian
Mhm.
identity. What means to be an Italian. You know, in Germany, I mean, what is to me, what does it to me like German, and it's put it together with the idea of
Mhm.
being Aryan, like a
Uh-huh.
white. Whereas in Peru, there were a lot of debates during this time because the main fascist ideologues were like part of these white elites. Some of them would say like part of the really small middle class,
Uh-huh.
but the other people who were not part of their own circles were like mixed race. So
Uh-huh.
they struggle to also to build a sort of type of like idea of peruanidad,
Uh-huh.
Peruvianness. So but they still like this ideal of Peruvianness was a hierarchical one in which like they value more the Spanish heritage in
Mhm.
contrast to the more indigenous basis. So
Mhm.
that was also another type of cultural identity difficulty that these fascist intellectuals and ideologues like
Mhm.
face. So I think there is the structural, but also the cultural and the sociological conditions.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Uh-huh. Got it. And my next question: how did Peruvian thinkers combine European fascism with their own traditional Catholic beliefs?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. Yeah, it's true. Like fascism in Germany, at least, was not really supported by or too much by Catholics. Of course, there were a specific group of Catholics who supported some fascist advances. But in Peru, it relates a lot with this more with certain Italian
Uh,
influence. Some of them got inspired by the Mussolini's fascism,
mm,
and but at the same time also I remember that, or just want to remind about the time in which initial fascist discourses were built in Peru coincided roughly with
mhm.
the civil war in Spain.
Uh-huh. Yes.
So this type of Spanish fascism that emerged during the civil war in Spain was deeply Catholic.
Uh-huh.
It was anti-Semitic. It was like, of course, like it's Spain, so they don't have this type of too much of this sort of like ethnic debates like in Peru, which is a
Mhm.
post-colonial republic by that time. So they have also their own version of their own like um, ethnic nationalism. Like.
Mhm.
They developed this so-called Hispanismo, Hispanidad, like what does it mean to be like Spanish,
Uh-huh.
and that was really, really like not paradoxically, but unsurprisingly, actually, that was brought also to Peru. Like
Uh-huh.
most of these fascist intellectuals in Peru in the 1930s, 1940s were also like deeply concerned about like value this Hispanic heritage that connect or that linked Peru with the Spanish tradition.
Mhm.
So it was in that way the Hispanidad or the Hispanism, this
Mhm.
Spanish heritage, was not only identified by the Spanish language
Mhm.
and all the cultural manifestations related to that, but also Catholicism,
Mhm.
because another quote unquote precious thing for the Peruvian fascist intellectuals that the Spanish brought to Peru was
Mhm.
the religion,
Uh-huh.
because and that informed many of the cultural practices in the country according to
Uh-huh.
them, the society.
Uh-huh.
So that's
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah. 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 I got it. So, and my next question: uh, what was like corporatism, and why was it promoted as a third way between capitalism and communism?
Yeah, no, just brief. So for the not only Peruvian intellectuals but mainly for the European ones. So if fascism or before fascism, one specific economic system that fascist intellectuals try to found for themselves, and
Mhm.
I try just to make the point that there is no such a thing as a fascist or fascist
Mhm.
economic system. So they were in search of one that could fit their own like ideal of society, you know. So fascists try to convince the masses that the problem is not only so the problem is at the same time that we have a lot of people who are accumulating wealth, so they are cutting opportunities for the workers or for the ones who are not affluent, so they want to get rid of capitalism, because at the same time capitalism is creating this unorganic society in which you have a lot of masses or people trying to make a living, so they are not really linked in a commonality, in a community during the 30s, but also they are trying to erase any trace of the so-called class struggle argument, meaning that they don't want to accept any type of socialism, which socialist discourse or leftist discourse, which refer to a class struggle, or that the idea that the workers, in order to increase their living conditions, should like face capitalists, you know. So in the midpoint in between these two extremes is the so-called corporatism. So corporatism that was also developed a lot, mainly in France and in Portugal, uh, had this idea. Well, also like have some corporatist examples in Romania. It's developed, these corporatist thinkers developed this idea that the, the economic system could be organized without not taking into account this principle of class struggle, but talking about like an harmonic reconciliation of the interest between workers and capitalists, or workers and business owners, something which is called like like I forgot the word for this, but it's basically the cooperation, class cooperation, you know. So, and class cooperation require also, like if we were defining what type of economic or social policy to choose, we'll need not only to do that into the parliament, but also we'll need to have another specific type of council, an economic council, social economic council, which would be integrated for the different representatives of the society, or representatives of the different bodies of the society, like a group representing aristocrats, another group representing like farmers, another group representing workers, industrial workers, another group representing capitalists, and they gather together. They would like try to, you know. So fascists like assume that, but because they had this idea that the society had a specific hierarchy, you know, a specific order. So that's the type of. So it sounds really nice to have this integrated, well organized reconciliation type of system, but it was not a horizontal one. You know, it meant to be also like hierarchical. So, and hierarchical because the nation should respond to the interests of capital as well, because capital builds the possibilities to hire workers, you know. So that was the thing. Like, so in this case, it would be like a more like a as a pro-capitalist economic system, but which would be like respectful of the needs of the workers, but in a more like of, you know, not so clear way.
Got it. Thank you, Professor. That was it of part two. And for the part three, I prepared some questions for your research paper that is called Conflicting Claims and Taxation, a Distributive History of 20th Century Peru. So my first question is related to the politics behind missing statistics. So how did political shifts and power struggles between Peru's government institution lead to officials deliberately ignoring or stopping the collection of data on workers' wages and business profits?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a structural issue going on there in Peru with the national statistics, because uh, although we have like a clear legislation on what institutions should develop the figures of the national accounts, for instance, for that we have the National Institutes of Statistics and Informatics, which
Mm-hmm.
is like an autonomous agency in the government in Peru. That they wouldn't coordinate a lot with other institutions
Mm-hmm.
in the executive, and that would limit their own capacity to be like long run
Mm-hmm.
statistics. But at the same time, uh, the lack of cooperation is not only related to logistics or management like
Mm-hmm.
defect, but also because there is an active search for opacity, if that's the right word in English. I mean that, or to try to not make it clear who has the most important share of the economy. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? To try to uncover a specific like results,
Mm-hmm.
so they avoid that any type of government could be criticized, any type of administration could be criticized,
Uh-huh.
and that at the same on top of that, that it would that no other economic actor like a big firm could be identified as responsible for specific results, you know.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's a more complicated political economy, and of course there are ideological issues behind, and the typical difficulties involved by bureaucracies, you know. That's another issue that happens a lot there. But I would say that those are the main three reasons why it's so difficult to get this.
I'm back, Professor.
Sure,
Yeah, thank you for waiting for your patience.
that's
So,
fine. No, don't worry. Yes.
all right. So my next question is related to profit gains versus worker pay. Why have periods of economic recovery for Peruvian businesses usually come from cutting workers' rights and keeping pay low, rather than rather than from making companies more innovative and efficient?
Could you repeat that again? Sorry, I mean at the last
Yeah,
part.
yeah, yeah. So, like I said, like why have periods of economic recovery for Peruvian businesses usually come from cutting workers' rights and keeping pay low, rather than from making companies more innovative and efficient?
Yeah, I see. I mean that's a really that's a really interesting question, because it doesn't relate only with the Peruvian case, but with many cases like the United States. I mean that in this paper on conflict titled "Conflicting Claims," what I try to show is that, for instance, this gap that exists between productivity and wages, right? So. And that's not a figure, a chart that you find only in Peru. That's a chart that you find in the United States, but also I'm sure that probably for other countries like the UK, or
Uh-huh.
you know. So the main issue is that what happened globally in capitalism, but which is really specific for economies like Peru, is just like you have like a specific capitalist institutional structure that sort of like don't or try to create more means to invest and accumulate by low paying workers, you know.
Uh-huh.
And that has to be with paying like the workers not too good, I mean really bad, you know. Like, and that has to be with the specific or the specific sociological conditions in a country like Peru. I mean that I talk about this idea of the Peru was a polarized economy since the beginning of the 20th century, and initially mostly agricultural, actually mostly agricultural or more extractive economy till the 90s, till the 1970s, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So what you find there is just like you have an economy in which like elites or economic elites try to defend their own like assets, their own like money, their own
Mm-hmm.
investments against the rise of workers' power, you know,
Uh-huh.
or the capacity of the workers to extract more value. And it seems that that's functional for this type of extractive economies. And what I mean extractive is not the typical concept that some authors like Daron Acemoglu, James Robinson, and Simon Johnson are thinking on. I'm mostly thinking about like I'm mostly referring on what I mean by that is just the this idea of the economy mainly depending on agriculture, mining,
Mm-hmm.
these industries that require or that opens the floor for big owners, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So and the power of these big owners, it's so important during the initial or the first half of the 20th century in Peru, that they could even decide what's going on with the government, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So the government is sort of captured,
Uh-huh.
and in this way in which it is captured, the institutions are captured, but also institutions are the place where these actors, thinkers are
Mm-hmm.
like imposing their own like ideas, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So the institutions, or they create these whole traditions
Mm-hmm.
of economic policy that then led the economy to be framed in legislation or institutions which are less labor friendly, if you would say
Uh-huh.
so. Like I mean, and they don't even like, and these elites are not even like only capturing the government. These elites are also like the owners of the main media,
Mm-hmm.
newspapers, and all the stuff, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
they have, of course, a lot of cultural power as well. So and so it's like a top-down effect that then appears as a bottom-up as well, because these ideas transferred through media about the
Uh-huh.
economic policy make the uh, the groups in the society, the public sphere, to believe that whatever is enacted from the
Mm-hmm.
government, and it's not in favor of big capital, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
bad for workers. So, you know,
Uh-huh.
it's like a sort of like a complicated situation, or sort of capture not only of the government but also of the public opinion, you know.
Uh-huh.
Mhm. Yes.
Got it. And my next question is related to how powerful business groups block taxes. How did wealthy business organizations successfully stop or weaken government attempts to create fair tax systems over the course of the 20th century?
Yes. No, that's another good question. I mean, that during this time in which I was writing this, the research related to this working paper, and
Mm-hmm.
and of course, like working into this working paper, what
Mm-hmm.
you find out is just like most of the distributive outcomes have to be with evolution of policy ideas, but
Mm-hmm.
that these policy ideas had specific actors, you know. And an important actor into critiquing the imposition of sound like income and wealth taxation system in Peru since early 20th century was the Cámara de Comercio de Lima, like the Lima Chambers of Commerce, which was really critical to any type of economic policy which was reducing the profits for people involved in foreign
Mm-hmm.
trade, which
Uh-huh.
was all people with businesses, sorry, related to foreign trade, which at the same time were linked to other industries like agriculture, mining, because those were the commodities who went there to be but to be exported. And at the same time, this group in the Lima Chambers of Commerce represented the importers, which were bringing the machinery which were used into this type of like mining and agriculture industries, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have like deeply specific or powerful actor involved in the supply chain for these
Uh-huh.
industries. On top of that, at least before 1960s, you have other specific business associations related to agriculture. Like
Mhm.
the most famous one before the 1960s was the Sociedad Nacional Agraria, like Agriculture National Society, which gathered all these main landowners or entrepreneurs into the agriculture business, especially
Mhm.
the agricultural export business,
Uh-huh.
and then also businessmen and firms related to the cattle breeders association, and so on and so on.
Mhm.
But not all of them were really involved into manufacturing. For
Mhm.
instance, manufacturers had their own business association as well, and although they had also like free market ideas,
Uh-huh.
they wouldn't have the same type of influence in the media and the political debate like than the agriculture or the
Uh-huh.
mining or the cattle breeders associations
Mhm.
or the chambers of commerce. So these are the main actors trying to influence through publications, but also putting some of their main like collaborators into government to
Yeah, yeah.
implement like specific policies.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Got it. And my last question, related to your research paper, is like about like global market prices versus local workplace conflicts. When
Uh-huh.
business profits went up or down in Peru, what mattered more? Changes in international trade prices or internal struggles over worker wages?
I see. I think that Peru, given that it's really tied still to the to the export business, uh, is deeply affected by the evolution of international prices.
Uh,
And I think that that's one issue that then uh, affects the way that a capital responds to these specific changes. So
mhm,
whenever like there is a collapse into the international prices, for instance, commodities in agriculture,
mhm,
these business association or the firms or landowners before the 1970s were trying to do a lot of lobby or push forward like legislation that don't increase
mhm,
the wages or don't increase the protections for workers.
mhm,
So it's like an issue of it's I wouldn't say that it's I wouldn't compare both like these policy
uh-huh,
elements with the international prices. I would try to understand them in a sort of like a series of or a sequence.
mhm,
Like, and the sequence would be like okay, there is some international prices going down that deeply affects the profitability of capital or investments into mining and agriculture, and
mhm.
then that would require these people to do lobby or to be more active into like
Yeah.
capturing or the some government offices,
Uh-huh.
or like doing a huge campaign into explaining why
Mm,
the way to or what should be the right policy to recover the economy. Anyway,
mhm,
blah 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 blah.
uh-huh,
uh, uh, I think that, but in that case, the main, the trigger for the sequence would be like the international prices, and the
mhm,
other way around as well. Like if the prices are increasing, so there
uh-huh,
is more, the capital is more profitable in these industries, so they would say that okay, don't try to increase wages or don't try to implement pro labor policies. Just try
mhm,
to maintain the things or the institutions the way that they are working right now.
mhm,
And if we can figure out something which could be like more labor friendly, just try to create like a sort of like a emergency fund or a more like a targeted social policy, so
Mhm.
we don't have this more universal labor or social welfare system. I think
Uh-huh.
that the most important thing that they do is try to avoid or block any attempt to build a stronger social safety net,
Uh-huh.
but they would accept to have the so-called target poverty policies, or sorry,
Mhm.
targeted policies, meaning that they would try always to see to implement like a specific transfers, social transfers for poor people,
Mhm.
but they wouldn't affect anything what's going on in terms of labor legislation or the situation of the labor market, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So that's the main issue here.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
So, thank you, Professor. Those were my all questions for you today. So, I'm thank you for being our guest today. I'm very happy, and thank you for your uh, like answers to our questions. Like, yeah, they were like very clear, and I learned a lot from them. So, before you go, like, could you give some feedback to our podcast overall, what you liked, what you disliked, and yeah, we are open to the criticism.
Yes. No, thank you. No, I think that I like the first of all again. Like I want to say thank you again. I mean, this was all of a sudden. I really appreciate that.
Uh-huh.
I think that maybe if there were something to improve, would be just to maybe being clear about like or maybe to send a list of the questions before
uh, all
the
right.
interview. But then,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think that most of the questions were closely related to what I am working on, besides these questions on Europe.
All right.
But then I think that this was really enjoyable. Mhm.
So, thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Good luck on your